Stephen P.W. asked this. Finally, the U.S. Supreme Court, in its most recent rulings, has communicated to recalcitrant lower court judges that sweeping preliminary injunctions over unconstitutional overreach into the executive branch authorities, especially regarding immigration, will no longer be tolerated by the court. Do you agree with this? All right, so let's first of all just make clear what it is that the court decided. I think we have... Okay, so just about the court decision. There's some reference to court decisions, and there's a lot of different decisions on the question of immigration. Some have gone in one direction, some have gone in the other, and reconciling them would take a lot of time. But it's not necessary for this narrow question that you referenced, that the article member referenced, which is the idea of telling federal court judges that they don't have the power to issue injunctions that go beyond the case before them, that are nationwide injunctions. So let me just explain what they're saying here. So let's say you are a lawyer, you represent 6 people who are in the country illegally, and the Trump administration wants to deport them, not back to their home country, but to El Salvador for a prison, or to South Sudan, which is now where they're sending people in the country illegally. And they're just picking like the most war-torn, dangerous, poor places, and they're saying, we're not going to send you back to your country, we're going to send you to South Sudan or Libya. And you rush into court, and you have to, there's 3 levels of the federal judiciary: the Supreme Court, then there's appellate courts, and then underneath that are individual federal district courts. And you have to start in the federal court, except in the rarest of circumstances, but any lawsuit has to go to an individual federal court judge first, and only if you lose do you go to the appeals court, and then to the Supreme Court if they accept it. And the judge says it's unconstitutional to take these 6 individual plaintiffs who are in the country illegally and who the government wants to deport to South Sudan. It's unconstitutional to deport them to some third country. It's unconstitutional to do so without due process. So those 6 people are now subject to an injunction. The court says the government is hereby barred from sending the 6 people who brought this lawsuit to me to this third country that the U.S. government wants to send it to. That would be uncontroversial. I mean, it might be controversial on the merits, but nobody would doubt the federal court has the power to do that. Even if the decision is wrong, that's something to fix on appeal. What federal court judges have been doing, and they've done it long before Trump, but they've done it far more regularly and frequently in the last 5 months than they have in the last, 60 years combined. It's become very, very accelerated. Is when they issue these injunctions, they're not just saying it's unconstitutional and therefore you're prohibited from deporting these 6 people who brought this lawsuit to me. I'm ruling in their favor, and you can't deport these 6 people to the South Sudan without a more extensive due process requirement, because under the Constitution they have constitutional rights. We've been over many times why people who are non-citizens, including people in the country illegally, still have rights under the Constitution. That the Supreme Court has recognized that for 150 years. It's not radical, it's not new, it's not left-wing. It's just how the Constitution works. You don't have to like it, but it's just what the Supreme Court has regularly ruled. But what they're doing, instead of saying you're enjoined from removing these 6 people, is they're saying the government as a whole, not just in this case, but every case, is enjoined from deporting anybody to the South Sudan or to El Salvador without these kinds of hearings necessary. In other words, they're not just issuing an injunction for the people before them in court, they're issuing an injunction for the entire nation. For every citizen, every person who's not a citizen, every person in the United States illegally, they're purporting to describe rules and orders that are binding on the government for everyone they might want to deport. Now, as I've said before, this has never been uncommon. During the Biden years, for example, Joe Biden wanted to forgive student loan debt. The position of Democrats always was, when Nancy Pelosi was asked why he hasn't done it, she always said, well, it needs an act of Congress. But then Biden finally needed a way to satisfy his base. It was a promise that he had made, so he just unilaterally, through executive order, canceled student loan debt. Conservative groups went into a federal court representing various plaintiffs and asked for not just respect to those plaintiffs, but for the entire student loan program to be declared illegal and for its implementation to be enjoined. And they won in a federal district court. The judge issued a nationwide injunction. And that has happened in every administration. It was never particularly that controversial because it happened with a lot of restraint, rarely. But because of the frequency with which federal district judges have been doing it since Trump was elected back in January, and you can argue about why, by their own admission, the Trump administration's own admission, they're testing a lot of previously untested, relatively radical powers in a lot of different areas, but there certainly are political motives, I'm sure, too. You have a whole bunch of federal court judges just enjoining these policies nationwide. It's been a main grievance of the Trump administration. And as you likely know, the position of the Trump administration is that birthright citizenship violates the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that if you are born in the United States, you automatically become a citizen. Most legal scholars, constitutional scholars disagree. That's the merits of the case. So in the context of the Trump administration wanting to deport people who were born in the United States, and the Trump administration is making the argument they're not citizens, even though they were born here. So the question is, does birthright citizenship actually exist in the Constitution? The federal district court judge rejected the Trump administration's argument, said no, birthright citizenship is absolutely guaranteed by the Constitution, and enjoined not just those plaintiffs who brought the lawsuit who were going to get deported, but the government as a whole from deporting anybody who has citizenship based on the fact that they were born in the United States. That case was then appealed to the appellate court by the government. The appellate court affirmed the district court's ruling, said birthright citizenship is absolutely in the Constitution, and therefore affirmed it and said, no, you cannot deport anybody born in the United States. The Trump administration then appealed that to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court issued a ruling today. In that case, it did not decide the merits of birthright citizenship. It did not make a ruling on whether birthright citizenship is based on the Constitution or not. They are going to decide that at some point, presumably later. The only question they decided is the following. Do federal courts have the power to issue not just injunctions enjoining government conduct for the people as it applies to the people who brought the case, the ones who are before them, but for an entire nation? And with an important caveat that I'll get to at the end, just because it's kind of a detail for the most part, but maybe an important one, but maybe not. But what the Supreme Court said by a 6-3 ruling, and it broke down exactly along conservative and liberal lines. The three judges in dissent were Sotomayor, Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson. And Amy Coney Barrett wrote the majority opinion with John Roberts, Sam Alito, Clarence Thomas, and Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh. So that's 6 conservative judges. And the court ruled that the district court judges do not, again, with a caveat, do not have the power to issue nationwide universal injunctions. They only have the power to enjoin government action as it pertains to the people in front of them. And it was a pretty scathing dissent and an even more scathing ruling issued that was written by Amy Coney Barrett. Let me just, this is from the opinion of the court. I think we can put this on the screen. It was Trump versus Kaza Inc. is the name of the case. Donald Trump was sued, but his name comes first because he lost in the appellate court and the district court, so he's now appealing. And this section says, some say that the universal injunction, quote, gives the judiciary a powerful tool to check the executive branch. And they're quoting there Clarence Thomas, who in a concurring opinion wrote that he was more or less, Clarence Thomas was, saying that it's important that the judiciary have this check on the executive branch. But Amy Coney Barrett's opinion says, quote, but federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch. They resolve cases and controversies consistent with the authority Congress has given them. When a court concludes that the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power to. And there was another section there where she was quoting Ketanji Brown Jackson, And Coney Brown Jackson's view was, if courts can't do this, we're going to have an imperial judiciary. And Amy Coney Barrett really didn't even engage her arguments, just said it's so obviously contrary to not just 200 years of precedent, but also the Constitution. But she did say it's kind of ironic that Judge Brown Jackson warns of the dangers of an imperial presidency when she is obviously eager to create an imperial judiciary. So that's meaning an imperial judiciary that doesn't have its power just limited to the case before them. Now, I think a lot of people have trouble understanding what the power of federal courts are in the Constitution. And one of the things that I love most about the Constitution is that a lot of it was written to deliberately be a little bit ambiguous, to avoid being very unambiguous or specific or dogmatic about certain crucial questions, in part because they needed to be able to attract enough votes to ratify the Constitution. And there were people who had lots of disagreements about what the role of the court should be, what the role of the president should be, what the role of the Congress should be. So they kind of said, in part they left it vague because that was a way they could get votes, but also the whole idea of the Constitution is checks and balances. And the whole point of checks and balances is that the three branches are always going to be fighting for power. The president will want more power, the Congress will want more power, the courts will want more power. And through that struggle, no one branch will get too powerful. Everyone is checked by every other branch. You can't be a federal judge without the president nominating you and then having the Senate approve you. And even once you're approved, you can be impeached by the Congress, by the Senate. So every branch has checks from every other branch. And through this constant struggle for more and more power, there will be a balance of power, which is what they were obsessed with, preventing a king, essentially, from reemerging, since they had just fought a bloody war to emancipate themselves from that kind of rule. One of the concerns about the Congress is that they have just washed their hands of their power. President Trump decides, okay, I'm going to get involved in this new war with Israel, I'm going to go bomb Iran. And even though the Constitution says it's Congress that has the power to declare war, and you can read Federalist Papers saying the gravest decision a country can make is to go to war, and we should not be able to go to war unless the people, through their representatives in Congress, approve of it, since they're going to be the ones bearing the burden of that war, fighting it, paying for it. But Congress doesn't want to vote on wars because those are hard votes. Hillary Clinton voted for the war in Iraq, and it basically prevented her from getting the nomination twice. John Kerry did. It made his campaign in 2004 impossible. But had the Iraq war gone really well and they voted no, that too would have been an albatross around their neck. So they're very content, members of Congress, who just want to run for re-election, get higher office, not to have to vote on these things. They've given up that power. And that's really dangerous, because if Congress isn't fighting for its power, and it typically isn't, that's what creates this imbalance. But I just want to explain, I think people understand the power of the Congress and the power of the presidency, the executive, in Article 1, Congress, Article 2, the executive. Article 3 is where the judicial power is outlined. And, you know, a lot of these things are intended to be obscure, and a lot of them are complex, especially since they required 200 years of judicial interpretation to create these precedents that govern today. And people go to law school and study Article 3 for, you know, a year and a half in order to fully understand it. So it's understandable that people don't have a clear sense of it. So I just want to walk you through the basics, because I think it's so crucial to everything that's being debated now about these injunctions and what the Supreme Court decided today. So the key phrase for understanding the judicial power in the United States as defined and formed by Article 3 is what's called the case or controversy clause of the Supreme of the court, which is Section 2, Article 3, which defines how to what extent the judicial power extends. And before I show you this language, I just want to give you the kind of overview. Courts cannot and do not go around just opining on various questions. Like some laws passed by Congress, signed into law by the president, people say, I think it's unconstitutional, and then the court just comes along and says, oh, you know what, let me resolve this. I'll be the one to decide if it's constitutional or not. Just like courts don't go around without being asked to judge whether people who are charged with crimes are guilty. They have to have the case brought to them by the prosecutor. The person has to be charged, brought to court, and you have two sides that are in dispute, the prosecution and the defendant, the person charged. Same with civil cases. That person cheats me out of $1 million in a business deal. The court just doesn't issue an opinion. I have to go to the court, sue the person, create a controversy, a case or controversy, and then bring it to the court. And the court's power is to resolve the case in front of it, the case or controversy. That's what the case or controversy clause of Article 3, Section 2 means. Courts don't get to just go around opining and resolving things because they think it's important or saying laws are unconstitutional. If you believe a law is unconstitutional and you want a court to decide, that's not enough. You can't just go into a court and say, hey, Congress has passed this law and I don't like it. I think it's unconstitutional. I'd like you to decide. Court can't do that. You have to prove that you have standing to raise it, that you're being specifically and directly harmed by this law in order to let you sue the government, because otherwise you're just asking the court to opine in the abstract, and that's not what they do. Their judicial power is limited to cases and controversies before them. They don't opine on precedent. They don't create precedent on their own. They don't make legal rulings. All they're supposed to do is rule on the case before them. They have to have a fully formed case. One side sues someone, one side charges someone criminally, one side sues the government, and then the other side comes in and now you have a case or controversy. That's what courts are for. When someone sues somebody else, when you sue the government, when you charge someone with a crime. That's the only time judicial power is activated, is when someone brings a case before them. And the controversy that's taking place here is that when a federal district court judge issues a ruling that extends beyond the people before them, as I said, 6 people about to be deported run into court and sue the government saying, hey, what the government's trying to do to me is unconstitutional, the court absolutely has the power to decide for those 6 people whether their rights are being violated and to issue an injunction if necessary to protect them that applies to those 6 people. What courts have been doing over the 20th century, and especially since Trump was reelected, is basically saying my order doesn't just apply to the people before me, it applies to the entire country. It applies just to restrain the government everywhere it wants to go, way out of my district, way out of my state, way out of my circuit. And that's what has become controversial, because then you put a federal district court judge, a single judge at the lowest level, in charge of basically imposing his ruling or her ruling on the entire country. Here's Section 2 that defines the judicial power. Article 3 is the judicial power, the judiciary. Section 2 is the specific clause that defines it, and it says this, quote, the judicial power shall extend to all cases. So this is the key clause, the key idea already starting. It extends to all cases in law and equity that either arise under the Constitution. So you claim what the court government is doing to you is unconstitutional. Hey, they put me in jail for a speech I gave. They're violating my First Amendment rights. And then the court has to decide, should this person be released from jail? Have their constitutional rights been violated? It also extends to cases involving the laws of the United States, treaties made or which shall be made, to all cases affecting ambassadors or other public ministers and consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime, and then to controversies, this is the case and controversy clause, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, between 2 or more states, between a state and a citizen of another state, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants, and between a state or citizenship thereof and foreign citizens or subjects. So it very much says you have to have a case or controversy involving these parties. So let me just give you one example of how this limits what a federal court can do. It says the judicial power shall extend to controversies between citizens of different states. Between citizens of different states. So if I live in Alabama and somebody lives in Idaho and we have a business dispute, I don't have to bring it to the state courts of Alabama or the state courts of Idaho. I can bring it to a federal court because now it's between different states. And the only time citizens of the same state can sue each other is when claiming lands under grants of different states. Very rare case. So in general, if you have a civil case where you're suing somebody, you have to be of different states in order to get into a federal court. That's one way to get into a federal court, because the federal judicial power only extends there. And then Congress made it so that you have to have a certain amount at stake. So it's not like a small claims court. Hey, that guy owes me $10 and he didn't pay me, so now I'm in a federal court. You have to, I think the minimum amount that you have to allege is $75,000 to get into a federal court. Might have increased it. It's been a while since I practiced law, but that's the idea. So the federal court's power is limited to certain kinds of cases. People in the same state can sue one another if, and here's where this says it, it involves the laws of the United States. So if I sue somebody for breach of contract, that's not a federal law. That's not a law of the United States is involved. If I sue somebody for defamation, same thing. But if I sue them under a federal statute, a law of the United States, rather than a law of Alabama or Idaho, say there's a Civil Rights Act that is a federal law. It's a law of the United States, and I'm suing a restaurant saying it violated my civil rights under the Civil Rights Act by not letting me enter or by kicking me out or whatever. Even if you're in the same state, you can enter the federal courts because you're suing under the laws of the United States. All of which really goes to underscore the primary point here. You don't have to know all these different circumstances in which a federal court has power, but it is important to recognize that the judicial power of the United States federal courts is limited by the Constitution, by the Article 3 that defines the judicial power. And this idea of a case or controversies, which is exactly what the way that the power is defined. It extends to all cases and then has a bunch of cases, or to controversies and then defines all the different kind of controversies. Case or controversy, that is the linchpin of when a court has the power to rule. And what the court does, and the Supreme Court does this too. The Supreme Court sets precedent automatically when it rules because it issues principles that the lower courts are bound to follow. They don't have the right to discard them. But even the Supreme Court can't just rule in the abstract on whether a law is constitutional or not. They have to have a case or controversy brought to them as well. It has to involve two sides suing each other or charging one another with a crime in order to get to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is there only to resolve the case, just like the federal court does, just like the district court judge, just like the circuit court judge does. But obviously in the course of resolving the dispute, they issue principles, they affirm principles, which then become binding on everybody else's precedent. But the district court judge doesn't get to do that. A district court judge issues a ruling, and a district court judge in that same district, let alone somebody in another state or another circuit, is not in any way bound by that district court ruling. So you have a district court judge over here in Oregon issuing a nationwide injunction, and then you have a district court judge over here in Georgia saying, no, the rights of the plaintiffs are not being violated, but somehow the injunction that was issued by this one judge, whose power is supposed to be confined to the case before them, suddenly becomes binding on the entire nation. That's where the problem comes in. Obviously, Supreme Court rulings are binding on the entire nation because they are the Supreme Court. And this is where federal district judges have really, in a way, harmed their own power by making it far, far more frequent, far more extreme, far more kind of normalized than ever, that these individual, one judge in some federal district court building, and there's all over the country they have these, gets to decide not just for the people who brought the case before them, but for the entire country, what the government, the executive branch, the Congress is or is not permitted to do. That's when it starts to feel like and even become judicial overreach. Now, there are instances, and this is the caveat I said before, where the only way you can give relief to the people in front of you is by issuing a nationwide injunction. So you have a class of people, hundreds or thousands, who are affected by a government policy. They all join together to sue, which happens. As long as they have enough common interest, you can sue as a class. And the only way to give them relief is you can't just say, oh, it applies to these 3,000 people. You have to give them the relief for the entire country. There's other examples like that. And so the Supreme Court today said, all federal district court judges can do is issue rulings necessary to give relief to the people before them. It may be that there are times when a nationwide injunction is necessary to give relief to the plaintiffs, but in general, as it was true in this case, when you have 6 people in the country illegally suing not to be deported because they're, or 6 citizens who are here because of birthright citizenship, the only way, you don't need a nationwide injunction to give them complete relief. You just rule that the government can't deport those 6 people. But the next 12 people who are going to be deported have to separately sue in another district or another judge, or and so they're confining the power of federal district court judges to what the Article 3, Section 2 definition of case or controversy had in mind. I'm not fully convinced of the majority ruling, just because I read most of it, but not all of it. It was only issued this morning, and we're taping the show early today. And I haven't read all of the dissenting opinion, though I've read a lot of both to have a very good idea. But so I don't want to just hear and like say, oh yeah, this is right. But I do actually think that there is a serious problem of judicial overreach when you have federal district court judges routinely now applying their rulings, which are only supposed to apply to the people in front of them, not even be binding on other district court judges, saying this applies to what the U.S. government can do in the entire country. It's one thing if the Supreme Court says that, then you have the Supreme Court, the executive, Congress. But for a single federal court judge to override the executive branch of the Congress for the entire country, I think constitutionally, the language that I just showed you of case and controversy limits the judge's power, and just kind of the equities of how our government is supposed to work do too. And that's what Coney Barrett said today. It doesn't matter really all these arguments about why it's good or bad that Ketanji Brown Jackson is raising. You don't even need to indulge them, because what she's saying is just contrary to 250 years of judicial precedent about the power of the judiciary, plus the Constitution itself. And that's why I said the only thing Amy Coney Barrett wrote to even address Ketanji Brown Jackson's long sort of non-legal warnings about how the president is going to be now unconstrained, and wording about the imperial executive, the imperial presidency, is to say, like, ironically, you're so worried about imperial presidency, but you're actually embracing an imperial judiciary. And one of the reasons why I think Amy Coney Barrett is arguably the best judge on the court, even though conservatives get angry with her sometimes because she doesn't vote the party line, is precisely because she doesn't vote the party line. She follows legal principles. She's very studious about it. She takes it very seriously. And it was so ironic because when Trump nominated Amy Coney Barrett, the liberals went ballistic and said she's a religious fanatic. She's just going to automatically vote in favor of Donald Trump. They even claimed there was a quid pro quo, that he nominated her in exchange for her promise to invalidate the results of the 2020 election if he lost. And of course, he did lose that election. And Amy Coney Barrett, nor anyone on the Supreme Court, even remotely intervened to try and reverse the certified results of that election. Obviously, none of them apologized to her, but I think 6 years, 7 years later, we have a very clear understanding with her. She joins with the conservatives when she believes it, like she did on overturning Roe versus Wade. And in this case as well, a very crucial case for the Trump administration, but she's not just a party line judge. She really does look at constitutional principles and really doesn't care about the political or partisan outcome that everyone pretends that they want from a judge, sort of like everyone pretends that that's what they want from a journalist. Just do your profession, follow your principles, follow the mores of the work without regard any favor to one side or another. But oftentimes when people do that, they get attacked by both sides for not being loyal to either. But that's what I think makes her such a good judge. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.